to our presenters. This is the Perspectives on Japan's Higher Education Policy. And this is room 3C, in case anybody knows. And I'm Cheryl Silverman. I'll be moderating. I teach in this classroom. I do the anthropology courses for Lakeland. I'd like to first of all introduce our speakers, and then one by one they'll give their presentations, and we'll save the question Q&A for the last. And it's not on a stopwatch, but it looks like it's about 20 minutes per presentation, although we have 4 presentations and 5 people because one presentation is a joint presentation. So let's try to keep to around 20 minutes so we can leave time at the end for questions. I was told to try to finish on time, so let's aim for that. So first of all, I'll introduce Annette Bradford. She's assistant professor in the School of Business Administration at Meiji University and pursuing a doctorate in educational administration and policy studies at George Washington University. And she's recently completed a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs fellowship in Japan. Dr. Brender sitting next to her. He's currently Associate Dean of Lakeland College, Japan, and as former Japan and South Korean correspondent of the Chronicle for Higher Education, he published numerous articles on the higher education systems of Japan and Korea, and continues to make presentations for the Fulbright Organization and others on the state of Japanese higher education today and the future path. And then, we have Tao Hong and Tsukasa Daisen, okay, who have done a great deal of research in changing academic profession, internationalization of higher education and curriculum reforms in undergraduate education. They're both full professors at the Research Institute for Higher Education at Hiroshima University. And then Mr. Takao Kemibeku of Tokyo Jogakan College. He's worked with NEXT, the Japanese Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, and with UNESCO in Bangkok in the field of international education development and cooperation. He also served as consultant for UNESCO, ASEAN, East Asia Summit, NEXT, and other organizations. He has his MA from School of International Training and PhD in the University of Maryland. So let's go ahead with the first presentation by Annette Bradford, Assistant Professor, Meiji University. She's going to speak on globalization and internationalization, drivers of Japanese higher education reform.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I want to start this presentation with a little disclaimer saying I wasn't quite sure of the makeup of people attending this conference, and so I'm going to start off with a sort of slight literature review going over the definitions of globalization and internationalization, and I realize that many of you here already have that knowledge, so that's my disclaimer there. Now that I'm here and I see kind of who everybody is. But the idea for this presentation actually came to me last year as I was sitting in a presentation at the Japan Association of Language Teachers Conference. The presentation discussed the development of a survey to measure university students' perceptions of globalization, Japanese university students. And the presentation highlighted the fact that globalization, the term globalization, is used with ever-increasing frequency in higher education discourse, yet it's used in different ways by different people. And in the presentation, a short discussion ensued concerning the definitions and the usages of the terms globalization and internationalization. And it seemed that many times the two terms have been conflated. And I was prompted to think about the times that I'd seen the two words used interchangeably during the course of my own PhD research. I'm conducting a study into English taught programs in Japanese universities. And so I thought I'd sort of go through my understandings of the difference between globalization and internationalization. And then after that, I'm going to briefly introduce some of the Japanese higher education internationalization initiatives and comment on the status and the likelihood of success. So basically, in the higher education literature, internationalization is seen as something that higher education institutions do, while globalization is something that is happening to them. There are many volumes, of course, that have been written which seek to provide a definition of globalization. And after reviewing some of those volumes, I've concluded that it is an uneven and complex process. And as Steger in 2003 said, it can be likened to the parable of the blind scholars and their encounter with the elephant, where each scholar reached out and touched a different part of the elephant and drew a different conclusion as to the animal's overall shape. With globalization, some scholars argue that it is the opening up of business, trade, and economic activities that lie at the core of globalization, yet others emphasize the political, cultural, or ideological aspects, and others talk about the environmental processes. For me, a definition of globalization that resonates with me is one that includes dimensions of both spatial awareness and the process of interaction. Of course, advances in transportation and communication have enabled an ease of access to economic markets, social interactions, political relationships that was unimaginable just a few decades ago. So with that being said, globalization emphasizes worldwide conditions, and the impact that these conditions are having on universities is quite profound. The policies and programs that universities and governments implement to respond to globalization have become known as internationalization. And these policies and programs can include activities such as inbound and outbound mobility programs, transnational education programs, and the internationalization of the curriculum and teaching and learning processes. However, it would be false to argue that internationalization is only a reaction to globalization, as that relationship is not that clear-cut. The concepts are intertwined, and for example, an internationalization activity, for example, the intensification of student mobility programs that result from an institutional strategy to increase overseas student recruitment can contribute to the intensification of globalization. So it's a circular kind of motion. As globalization intensifies and higher education institutions see it as increasingly important to adapt to the changing environment, internationalization has in recent years become embedded into national and institutional strategies at many higher education institutions worldwide. However, as Jane Knight wrote in 2011, the term has come to describe almost everything remotely international or linked to the intercultural or global. And with that, any activity has become to be called internationalization, regardless of the substance of that activity. And more alarmingly, that means that many of these international activities and programs that are carried out to enhance the international outlook of a university have become synonymous with the end goal of internationalization. For example, there are tendencies to regard the establishment of a study abroad program or the creation of an international studies program as we have implemented internationalization. We are now internationalized. However, these programs are, I think, better seen as tools for promoting internationalization, and without careful integration of these programs into the wider framework of the university and allowing students to capitalize on the skills that they learn in these programs when they return from their study abroad program, for example, it can't be said that the the students have gained an international education unless we've done something with these international activities that they have been experiencing. So, in other words, the instruments of internationalization have become the main objective in many cases, and institutions are clamoring after more exchange, more degree mobility, more recruitment of international students without considering why they really want these things. And this is happening in many countries. In 2011, DeWitt and Rannenberg and DeWitt summed this up succinctly when they said that the why and the what of internationalization have been taken over by the how. So I think we're reaching a point of where institutions need to go back to the basics almost and consider, what does internationalization mean for us? Why are we embarking down the path of increasing international students and increasing study abroad programs? What do we hope to achieve by implementing these programs, and how are we going to achieve that? And this is the point that concerns me when I consider recent internationalization policies and efforts in Japanese higher education, because I think that by and large institutions are still not paying enough attention to exactly why they are implementing these new international programs, especially with all of the funding streams that we're seeing at the moment. And today I heard reference of the super global whatever thing. I still don't know the real name for that, but the deadline for applying for the super global funding stream is rapidly approaching, and people are sort of saying, oh, we need to do this, we need to internationalize, without thinking, exactly what are we hoping to achieve, why are we jumping on this bandwagon? So I can't compete with the wonderful outline we had this morning of Japan's internationalization policies, but here's a brief explanation that the shifts in focus of Japan's major internationalization policies have been well reported in recent years, from a focus on increasing the quantity of international students in Japan as a form of overseas development assistance with the 100,000 international students plan in the 1980s, to a recognition in the late 2000s of the need to attract high-quality international students who could contribute to the research agendas and the overall competitiveness of Japanese universities, with the 300,000 international students plan, to a focus on increasing outbound mobility and nurturing global human resources. And this began in about 2010, when discourse surrounding the 300,000 international students plan shifted to a discourse of not only attracting international students to campuses, but to looking at what the presence of international students on campuses can do to help internationalize the domestic students. And this has been sort of firmly embedded into national policy recently, especially with the April 2014 joint statement by Abe and Obama, where they pledged that both countries are interested in increasing student exchange. So Japan definitely now has more outbound focus than it did just a few years ago. A little bit more detail about Japan's recent internationalization initiatives. In 2005, there was a strategic fund for establishing international headquarters of universities, where 20 pilot universities developed headquarters to support university-wide international activities, including attracting distinguished researchers from both Japan and abroad. Then in 2008, 2009, under the 300,000 students plan, the project for establishing University Network for Internationalization, otherwise known as the Global 30, was established. And in this project, 13 universities became flagship universities for promoting internationalization. This project has focused on inbound mobility with the creation of English medium degree programs and an ease of application and entry for these students. Then after that, we have the Reinventing Japan project that established a number of collaborative programs between Japanese universities and universities in Southeast Asia and the United States. And then in 2012, there was the Go Global Japan project, formerly the Global 30 Plus, whose aim was to foster global human resources, which means it was a primarily outbound program. 42 universities received funding to develop study abroad programs. Also, we've seen increased government commitment for scholarships for outbound students at the end of last year. So why am I talking about all of those? I think when we look at this sort of policy perspective, it's perhaps easy to see the fundamental rationales for these programs. You know, for example, we can see that there's a rationale of attracting international students and promoting study abroad in order to help nurture global human resources, or global citizens in Japan, which I prefer. I'm not quite sure about the human resources term myself, because I think it connotes people like objects. And I think at a policy level we can see these rationales, but I worry that these rationales are not clearly thought out at the institutional level right now. So as it was mentioned in the introduction, I'm currently completing my PhD research on the internationalization of higher education. And I have focused on universities that are implementing the Global 30 project. And as I said, under this project, universities are implementing English medium instruction programs, whereby international students can graduate by taking courses conducted entirely in English and complete their entire 4-year degree in English at the undergraduate level.